I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up,
The challenges facing humanity are not unsurmountable if we work together.
a new session of the UN General Assembly gets underway with the new leader taking the gavel.
The SDGs are such a perfect investment opportunity for businesses.
Building partnerships for a better future. A conversation about the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. Opening doors to opportunity. Inside a landmark public library that could help change the face of education in one developing country. Next.
The 79th session of the UN General Assembly is officially underway. Over the next few weeks, leaders from around the globe will gather here in New York City to confront a sweeping range of global issues, from violent conflicts to the devastating effects of sea level rise and climate change to representation here at the United Nations. The session opened Tuesday with a new General Assembly president taking the gavel for the first time. Philemon Yang hails from Cameroon. He steps into the role amid a push for better representation for the African continent at the UN.
It was the official closing of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly. And in the words of the Secretary General, it was a year of many challenges, but also a year of great accomplishments. The General Assembly was headed by Dennis Francis, a diplomat from Trinidad and Tobago. And it was during his tenure that the Assembly passed 3 milestone resolutions on the Gaza conflict. He is also credited with convening the Assembly's first ever Sustainability Week, which focused on issues such as tourism, transport and infrastructure.
Mr. President, on behalf of the entire UN family, thank you for your efforts over the last year.
Francis, during his final remarks to the General Assembly, was unable to contain his emotions as he spoke passionately about the UN and the need for multilateralism to work.
I am deeply convinced that this institution, the United Nations, remain one of the greatest forces for good in the world, and that we must work hard to sustain its longevity.
Francis now hands over the gavel to Philemon Yang, the former Prime Minister of Cameroon. Yang presided over the first meeting of the 79th session of the Assembly. He says peace and security will continue to be of paramount importance during his tenure by prioritizing conflict prevention rather than resorting to weapons to settle differences.
Cooperation among member states is what allows us to harness our collective resources and ingenuity to realize humanity's greatest aspirations, such as peace, justice, and sustainable development among them. The General Assembly, with its near universal membership of 193 member states, stands as our most powerful platform to fully seize its promise.
For the first time, Palestine joined member states on the main floor of the General Assembly. In May, member states voted in favor of granting it new rights and privileges. While this session of the General Assembly was considered to be a busy one, the 79th session promises to be no different. Just days before world leaders begin to arrive here for the annual gathering later this month, member states will again vote on a Palestinian draft resolution against Israel, this time compelling them to withdraw from the occupied Palestinian territories within 6 months. Jody Jacob, CGTN, New York.
Our Shunaja asked the 78th General Assembly President Dennis Francis what advice he has for his successor, Philemon Yang.
I would advise him to listen closely to what the delegations are saying. It's very important that the delegations feel that
the signals that they send, the comments they make, their utterances are being taken seriously. But President-elect Yang is an experienced politician himself. I don't think that he's necessarily in need of my advice. He's been a long-standing and successful and highly regarded politician. Naturally, I wish him well, and I'm prepared to do everything that I can to support his presidency, and will do everything I can. Because once you are in this office, it sort of binds you to your predecessors and your successors. And all of us, I think, would like to see the office execute its functions in a way that adds significant value to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. We're here to serve the people, to improve their lives, and to make things better in order to ensure that no one is left behind.
For nearly a year, the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the resulting humanitarian crisis has dominated the agenda here at the United Nations. Finding viable solutions in the Middle East will also be a key concern for the new General Assembly session.
The use of heavy weapons in densely populated areas is unconscionable. Palestinians had moved to this area in Khan Yunis in search for shelter, in search of safety, after being repeatedly instructed to do so by the Israeli authorities themselves.
This week, the Secretary General condemned an Israeli airstrike on a designated safe zone in Khan Yunis. 11 people were killed. Wednesday, an UNRWA school was hit in a separate round of airstrikes. More than a dozen people were killed. Israeli forces say they were targeting Hamas figures with the strike. It is the fifth time the same facility has been hit in 11 months of fighting. The Secretary General is renewing his call for an immediate ceasefire and immediate release of all hostages. From the Security Council to the briefing room and beyond, Shudija is monitoring the latest developments inside the UN. Dija.
Yes, Elaine. This week, the most important thing for the UN is probably the start of the 79th session of General Assembly, and for the first time ever, State of Palestine is sitting among member states. During the opening session, Egyptian Ambassador Osama Abdel Khalek asked the President Philemon Young to confirm this arrangement.
And I request you to confirm with the Secretariat that His Excellency Ambassador Riyad Mansour, the distinguished permanent representative of the State of Palestine, is seated among the member states accordingly. I have been informed that all arrangements have been made to have Palestine seated where it's supposed to sit.
And obviously, it drew the objection from Israeli mission.
These decisions reward terrorism and seriously impair the possibility of reaching a solution to the conflict and resolve matters through peaceful negotiations. And they also make it even more difficult to bring about the return of the 101 hostages, further distancing the end of the war.
After the session, ambassadors of many member states went to congratulate Palestine for this significant change. There were so many people that they had to form a line waiting for the handshake. And later, I briefly asked Palestinian ambassador his feeling about this.
You've been here for quite some time. How do you feel to sit among
I feel great. This is a historic moment, and it is a significant step in acquiring our right, a legal right and natural right to become a full member.
How's the other member states' response?
Very, very greatly. There was a long line of people coming to our seat, extending their congratulations. We appreciate that and we cherish that.
In May, General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted a resolution granting State of Palestine a series of privileges, including sitting among member states. It can also, representing a group, introduce a draft resolution in the General Assembly. Will Ambassador Mansour introduce the latest draft resolution on ICJ himself?
Are you going to introduce the draft resolution you had yourself now?
You just wait and see.
Well, what I'm talking about is a new draft resolution circulating among member states. This lengthy draft, named Advisory Opinion of the International Court of Justice on the Legal Consequences Arising from Israel's Policy and Practices in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, and from the illegality of Israel's continued presence in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, is demanding Israel brings to an end without delay its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. So it seems the vote will happen before the high-level week, which means it will happen next week. We will see how it plays out. And it's less than 10 days to have Summit of the Future. But what is Summit of the Future exactly? Let's hear from Guy Ryder, UN Under-Secretary General for Policy and lead for the Summit of the Future. Can you explain what the Summit of the Future is to our audience in a very interesting way?
You have to go underneath the formalities and sometimes language which is not easily accessible. But if we succeed in getting agreement from 193 member states on actions that will secure governance of new technologies that will spread benefits much more widely through inclusion, through connectivity, through the governance of artificial intelligence. If we're able, you've heard it before, to accelerate SDGs, if we're able to revamp the United Nations peace operations, if we are able to initiate the changes that will make the Security Council more effective, yes, this will influence people's lives. Will it happen the day after the pact is gavelled? No. It needs, and you pointed to the key here, it needs implementation.
Well, that's all from me. Elaine.
Shudija, thanks. Throughout the UN system, agencies are examining how they can adapt to meet the needs of a rapidly changing world. Peacekeeping operations are no exception. For the force known as the Blue Helmets, the mission is evolving.
Peacekeeping missions are increasingly confronting drivers of conflict that have no borders, such as transnational organized crime, the illegal exploitation of natural resources, and the impact of climate change. Non-state actors engaged in these illicit activities are also weaponizing cheap technologies, such as improvised explosive devices and drones, and are propagating disinformation and hate speech.
Jean-Pierre Lacroix called for increased support for peacekeeping operations to meet a growing list of challenges. Undersecretary General Lacroix pointed to the upcoming Summit of the Future as a chance to examine the strengths of 8 decades of peacekeeping. Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda. The U.S. and Ecuador want a formal peacekeeping mission deployed to Haiti. A Kenyan-led security mission has been on the ground in the Caribbean nation for over 2 months, helping Haitian police quell gang violence. The U.S. plan would extend the security mission until October of next year and transition to a peacekeeping operation. China says the conditions in Haiti need to stabilize before considering a change to the mandate.
Expecting peacekeeping operations to be a Superman to stem the tide and save the day is unrealistic. Requesting peacekeeping operations to be a backup with no regard to the specifics of a given situation is even more irresponsible.
The UN is raising the alarm as the number of people facing catastrophic hunger has more than doubled in the past year. Globally, nearly 2 million people are now grappling with the most critical level of food insecurity, driven by conflict, drought, and rising food prices. The UN Refugee Agency is seeking nearly $22 million to help people in Africa impacted by the Mpox emergency. Funding would support over 9 million people forcibly displaced across 35 countries. It comes as the first delivery of Mpox vaccines arrived in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Coming up.
Summit of the Future is going to be really important, I think, for re-energizing, of course, the private sector, but certainly refocusing globally on a couple of key issues and tenets of the summit.
UN Insider.
The private sector plays a key role in efforts to reach these Sustainable Development Goals. The UN Global Compact brings together more than 20,000 companies to form the world's biggest corporate sustainability initiative. I sat down with Sanda Ojiambo, Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact.
Sanda, explain the idea and what is behind UN Global Compact and how it was conceived.
So, the UN Global Compact was formed in the year 2000. Secretary General then was Kofi Annan. If you think back to that time, it was the era of big capital, of structural adjustment in economies, and really just understanding the role that private capital played in the world. And Secretary General Annan thought it was important to build a compact, he called it, between the private sector and the United Nations, and hence the Global Compact was born. But what was different was it was founded on the notion of principles, that there were 10 principles that would be fundamental to ensuring that business was responsible, sustainable, and inclusive.
And in that time, what have you seen? How has it evolved?
It's been amazing. I think when SG Annan was in the room, there were 40 bold leaders who stood forward. Our principles are about human rights, labor, the environment, and now anti-corruption. So from a bold group of 40 leaders, 40 businesses, we now stand at about 23,000 businesses over time. The use of the principles has evolved. Around the world, people talk a lot more about corporate responsibility or ESG. Over time, we've now integrated working with the Sustainable Development Goals and delivering on them. So public discourse has evolved. Of course, we can do a lot more.
So how do you begin to convince companies to change the way they've done things for years and to think and act more sustainably in line with the Sustainable Development Goals? And what have been the challenges in doing so?
I think if I was to pause and reflect what has been sort of, a breaking point, I'd go back to 4 years ago. I think the COVID pandemic, the climate crisis, the high cost of capital and conflict globally, and I call them the 4 Cs, have really given us reason to pause. And for the private sector, it was an opportunity to reflect on what sustainable business looked like. Because around the world, people reflected on broken global supply chains. What does that look like? People are now reflecting on what happens when there's conflict. How does business and trade work, either when there's conflict in country or between countries? The high cost of capital is really impacting, the ability for both macro large projects as well as, small businesses accessing capital to keep their businesses going. And of course, the climate crisis threatens our very, access to resources as well as long-term stability and sustainability. So in many ways, I don't think we need to convince. The signs are there. We can see the challenges ahead of us. What we need to do more of, perhaps, is ensure that we can develop models that work, show people how principles can really propel your business towards sustainability and competitiveness, and really demonstrate the value of investing in the SDGs, because the SDGs are such a perfect investment opportunity for businesses.
And there's something that you introduced last year called the Faster Forward Initiative, which is all about action and accountability. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you hope to achieve with it?
Yeah, so last year, 2023 September, the UN system took a stock take of where we were on progress with the SDGs. And as you know, we're not on track. And what we did as the UN system was to look at ways in which we could accelerate progress on the SDGs. For the UN Global Compact, we launched the Forward Faster initiative, which was our way of looking at 5, I'll call them force multipliers, 5 areas where the private sector could elevate its engagement in the SDGs and certainly accelerate progress. So the 5 areas for us are gender equality, it's climate, it's living wage. It also goes into issues such as water resilience and water stewardship, so important. And then finally, sustainable finance. How do we move private capital into areas that will result in, again, that force multiplier for investment in the SDGs?
Very soon, we will see the Summit of the Future here at UN headquarters. What is UN Global Compact's role in that?
Summit of the Future is going to be really important, I think, to for re-energizing, of course, the private sector, but certainly refocusing globally on a couple of key issues and tenets of the summit. From the Global Compact angle, we will continue to mobilize the private sector. They're so key to these discussions, but also, you know, the framing of the Summit of the Future, the multilateral system is so important to ensure trade, business, and investment continues. Digital tech and AI has been so important in looking at how business happens and business, you know, grows and accelerates, but also looking at the continued business of the SDGs and what that means for the private sector. So we're really excited about this opportunity to sort of take a fresh look at what sustainable development looks like from a private sector angle as we approach 6 years, you know, towards the SDG goal of 2030.
And as you approach 25 years of existence, what are you most optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the fact that CEOs, you know, from around the world do see the SDGs as a North Star. They are keen to be able to align their business strategies with the SDGs, and they're keen to be able to make a contribution to the goals and the missions of the UN. Private sector is so critical to the functioning of countries and of economies, and I think when we see that CEO leadership and the strong contribution, it's important. You know, we know what the problems are. I think what's most important for us is to be able to see how we can spread that knowledge, that awareness, and that desire for action even further. That keeps me optimistic.
So, Sanda, very recently, China's Ministry of Finance issued a draft sustainability reporting framework for companies in the country to have something to work toward by 2030. How important is it to have that kind of support at the government level?
I think it's great to be able to set standards on what corporate sustainability looks like. You know, globally, we're seeing a lot more focus on compliance, on regulation, on setting those standards, so that when we talk about being environmentally sustainable or being inclusive, it means the same, you know, around the world. And it's been great to see the momentum in various countries setting their own corporate sustainability standards. So, you know, we also applaud the work and the momentum that is building in China on this. I think the Global Compact there, because we do have a network and a liaison office, is very active in promoting adherence to standards, meeting standards, and going beyond compliance for our close to 1,000 business members that we have in country.
And you were recently in China working on the Belt and Road Initiative event there. Can you tell us what you accomplished there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we visited China to address a couple of key issues. We were tasked with preparing a set of principles by which businesses that work within the BRI should adhere to. These are principles looking at issues on rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. So we finished those publications and presented them to a business audience for those tools to be used again in the BRI work. We also worked on the GDI, the Global Development Initiative, that is also another platform that brings in private sector to invest in development, both domestically in country and externally. It's been great to be able to partner on that as well. And then with our businesses, we held roundtables with CEOs to look at how China is advancing on critical issues such as climate and energy transition and building an inclusive society.
Sanda Ojamba, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Literacy is at the core of the UN's Sustainable Development Goal number 4, ensuring a quality education for all. Globally, UNESCO estimates about 780 million adults do not know how to read and write, while 250 million children aged 6 to 18 lack basic literacy skills, an issue made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, some 30 countries have joined the Global Alliance for Literacy, with the goal of improving youth and adult literacy. In El Salvador, the government has taken a bold step aimed at changing the future of education in the country. It has constructed the largest and most modern public library in Central America. Toby Muse takes us inside the Center of Learning and Culture.
It's a feat of construction nestled in the old colonial centre of San Salvador. What's called the world's most modern library takes up 24,000 square metres, and it's hoped will jumpstart El Salvador's education. A team of 434 people keep this library open and running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yo personalmente me siento
Miguel Aquino, the library's director, shows me around.
como decía Humberto Eco.
Each of the library's 7 levels appeal to different ages, rising from toddlers to children to teenagers and up to adults. Its mission is to get Salvadorian children reading some of the more than 300,000 books on these shelves.
Y lo importante también es el acceso a la lectura y que la lectura no sea una herramienta de estrés, sino una herramienta de relajación o una herramienta que me permita disfrutar un buen libro.
The library aims to make learning attractive for children, to encourage them to want to read. A well-equipped gaming zone is for those children who have finished reading a book.
Nosotros le decimos Alicia en el País de las Maravillas, porque hay muchas maravillas de lectura, de vivencias y de conocimiento.
The idea was to evolve the library for the new digital age. Children can learn virtual reality and 3D printing. And the library breaks the stereotype of the old stuffy and dusty hall of books and silence.
Es también el miedo que se tiene a las bibliotecas, que son calladas, que me regañan. Eso es distinto. Rompemos el esquema de Biblioteca Nacional en que hay espacios de puro silencio, pero también hay espacios que se pueden hacer actividades hasta de karaoke.
The library was built in partnership with China, which funded the $57 million construction. China has left a team of engineers to look after the running of the library for a minimum term of 2 years before Salvadorians take over the management. The library has been a hit with the people of El Salvador, with around 10,000 visitors every day. The library's director hopes that this will translate into higher rates of people enjoying reading in the country.
Pues lo primordial es fomentar el hábito de la lectura, como lo decía, no solo decodificando el libro, sino haciéndolo parte de su diario vivir.
El Salvador is facing a big challenge in tackling an education system racked by low scores, underachievement, and school dropouts. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development runs the Program for International Student Assessment, which measures education levels for 147 territories the world over in reading, science, and mathematics. Last year, El Salvador came close to the bottom, with the study finding that over 60% of 15 and 16-year-old students didn't have basic knowledge of the 3 areas. This education deficit is determining what type of investment will be made in El Salvador, and so the country's very future.
Entonces, la pregunta es qué inversores queremos atraer, si maquila o empresas tecnológicas. Si queremos atraer empresas tecnológicas, tenemos que mejorar el inglés, la escolaridad promedio, la disponibilidad de ingenieros. Si no, seguiremos en el anonimato de Centroamérica.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider.